Okay. Every year I do a panel on a specific wine style that might be impacted as a result of climate change. Last year, last edition, I did the rosé. And this year, I was very selfish because a huge amount of my consumption in the year is sparkling. And I wanted to talk about how climate change might be impacting what I drink the most, which is sparkling wine. And I'm quite excited about this panel because we have people from different parts of the world, different challenges, but all committed to sparkling wine. Starting Pierre Naviaux, Comité de Champagne. Pierre is the director of sustainability department at the Comité de Champagne. And just for you to know, the Comité de Champagne leads the sustainability plan for the champagne industry. They have 6,000 winemakers, 140 co-ops, and 400 champagne vineyards. So big organization. And it'll be interesting to talk. We often look at champagne and we're quite mean on them, saying they're not sustainable enough. Well, they were one of the first region to track the carbon footprint. So we'll lots to discuss with Pierre, and we'll talk about that in other panel. But today we'll kind of look at um, what is Champagne doing? Everyone is looking at you, so we'll look at what Champagne is doing to adapt to the warming condition. Next, we have Marc Picôn from Sumarroca. You might have tried his wine yesterday. Marc comes from a winemaking family. His mom was a winemaker. He is from the region. He's from Vilafranca del Penedès. And Sumarroca, when I was telling you that we could have put so many people on different panels, we could have put Marc on pretty much every panel because Sumarroca is checking all the boxes. There's a lot of things they do. So please go and talk to him about other topics because he will be able to help you. But it's been challenging in the Penedès region. We've gone from mildew loss to another year we're losing to drought. So lots of challenges. We'll talk about that. Then I think Jean-Benoit Deslauriers from Benjamin Bridge in Nova Scotia must be the chouchou of climate change. He has been here every single edition of this is your fourth time I think at the conference, and we did a mini conference in Nova Scotia last April, and um, uh, Jean-Benoit was speaking at that as well. You've been extremely supportive, and today we are going to take you on a little different way to think about how the changes are affecting the industry and what can we do to be sustainable. So it'll be very interesting. And then at the end, really pleased to have Marc Théberge from Domaine Bergeville in Quebec. We do make wine, delicious sparkling wine. And um, Marc was an engineer before he came to wine. I'm sure you were making, it was much easier to make money than in the wine industry. But what I really admire with Marc, when he started the vineyard with his wife, Eve, um, you know, when you're a new wine region, sometimes every wine region has done that. You have the syndrome of wanting to do everything because they're trying to sort things out. But right from the beginning, Marc and his wife said, we really believe in sparkling wine for this region, and that's the only thing we'll do is sparkling wine, and mainly from hybrids. So it's going to be interesting to talk about how it's impacting climate change and impacting Quebec. Pierre, I have to start with you because, of course, when we think of sparkling, everyone look at always the model. You're always, what is Champagne doing? There's a lot of discussion right now. Do we stop malolactic? Do we keep malolactic? Do we continue to do the dosage or we stop the dosage? We saw in the news that in 2023, it was the first year that producers were harvesting Voltis, which is an hybrid, and they were allowed to use that, which is a bit surprising, right? As a conservative, we think of Champagne, and we also know Chardonnay, Pinot Meunier, and Pinot Noir, but there's a lot of other grapes that are allowed in the production of Champagne that we haven't used as much. And now people are going back to those grapes, and they're thinking, well, maybe um, uh, grapes like Pinot Blanc and Pinot Gris and so on maybe advantages in the future. So can you give us an update of what's going on and what you're doing and experimenting with?
Okay, thank you, Michelle. So first of all, I want to really make a clear distinction between adaptation and mitigation, because we often tend to mix one and each other. So mitigation is basically reducing our carbon footprint. Okay, and if you're interested in that, you have to be patient, because I will introduce that this afternoon at the last panel. So stay until the end. And adaptation is really adapting to a climate that is changing anyway. But both are interconnected, because if we don't first mitigate, the IPCC models are quite scary on the business as usual scenario, because I think if we reach plus 8 Celsius degrees at the end of the century, the priority will not to make champagne anymore. Okay, it will be to survive and maybe grow potatoes or whatever, but not make champagne. Yeah, it cost me a bit to say that, but apparently we are not essential to the survival of the human species. So that's very important to work this part. But anyway, climate change is already happening, and we are seeing that today. So even in the best case scenario, we will have to adapt, because we see it today. So what are we seeing today? One example of
Can we put the
indicators.
slide up for Pierre? Okay, merci.
Thank you. So we monitor dozens of different climate indicators. So I will just show you some examples of what we are seeing. Regarding the rain, the yearly amount of rain is quite steady. So we are at about 700 millimeters per year. So this hasn't changed a lot in the past decades. What has changed, though, is the period of rain. We are seeing more and more extreme period with very dry season and very wet season. We can have rain non-stop for 3 months. And so we have some very huge issues of erosion of roots that are choking sometimes. We saw some very impressive phenomena of roots, aerial roots. The vine is just choking on the soil, so it tries to grow roots outside in the air. It's very impressive. I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that's very impressive. So that's what we see regarding the rain, for instance. Regarding the temperature, we are at about plus 2 Celsius degrees. Regarding the average temperature, over the last 40 years, there has been an increase of 2 Celsius degrees. So we are starting to see some effect on that. But most impressive part is the Huglin index. So I don't know if you're familiar with it, but that's the sum of temperature above 10 Celsius degrees between April and September. So that's a very good viticulture index to see the impact of temperature on the growth of the vine. And we started at the interface between fresh and very fresh, where is Quebec. And now we are going to temperate climate. Okay, we are still fresh on some years, but we are more on the temperate part. So for the short term, it means easier vintages, better vintages, but yeah, we are just at the last level of a building that is burning. So let's not be too happy to make some saving on the heating. We know that we are going up there, and so we have to be prepared to that. You were not seeing what I was talking about, sorry. Okay, so here it's the measure temperature in black, and the red part is according to the IPCC model. So you see we were there, Reims, and today we are closest to where Bordeaux was a few decades ago. So yeah, and when we get to Jerez, well, that's it raises some question about the typicity of our wine, frankly. This also is quite striking, this index. You see the amount of days above 30 Celsius degrees, but also above 35 Celsius degrees has been increasing. Above 35, it was very exceptional some years ago. and now it's every year. Every year we have some days above 35. So very uncommon for Champagne, and sometimes it can cause a major water and nitrogen stress, and completely stop the vine from working in the place where we are. So this is also this has also been very new. It's impacting the way we work, and it's also incentivizing us to grow more hedgerows and trees around the plots to keep more freshness in the vineyard. Is it? Oops. Yep. And this one is a bit more complex. In red, you have the birth date, which has been coming a bit more early today, so at the middle of April. And in blue, you have the percentage of vineyard that has been destroyed by spring frost. So the bud burst is coming earlier and earlier, but we still have some very short period of cold, of frost, and so we see an increase in the occurrence of the frost damage in the past years. So this has pushed us to work also on the way of pruning the vine, to prune it the latest possible in the sectors that are sensitive to the frost, to slow down the vine and to be able to select also the non-frosted buds. But also we have been working on the anti-frost technology, which can come into competition with our mitigation effort. Because if it's about burning anything to heat up the vineyard, then we have a problem. So selecting the anti-frost technology that don't consume so much carbon, for instance, the windmills, but also the best anti-frost technology that we have is actually the reserve that we have. And I wanted to tell you about that because actually Champagne has always been about climate resilience. Before it was about a fresh climate and a lot of diseases and a lot of irregular vintage. But thanks to that, the Champenois developed a knowledge of blending the years, the plots, and the grapes. And this is very helpful today in the context of climate change because we can adapt to some bad years. For instance, 2021, we had a very catastrophic yield. Some organic growers didn't even get one grape. And so thanks to the reserve, they were saved because otherwise they would have gone to bankruptcy. So this is one of the tools. We have many tools. You were talking about the dosage. We were about the malolactic fermentation. We can act on a lot of parameters to adapt to this changing condition. What does it mean for the grape? You see the amount of alcohol that is increasing, the total acidity that is decreasing, and the harvest days, 22 days. So some years ago, it was normal to harvest at the end of September, beginning of October. Today is end of August and beginning of September. So yeah, you cannot. 10 years ago, we still have some climate septics in Champagne. Not a lot, but some of them. Today, I don't see them. And so, what are we doing in terms of adaptation? This is the first step. This is a very humble first step on working on the matter. We know that it won't be sufficient. We need a more systemic approach. So we are trying to develop a more systemic way of assessing the climate change to have a very long-term strategy. But for the moment, we have some of the tools that we can act on. So you were talking a lot, John mentioned it, and also Etienne yesterday, on the material, grape material. We have a lot of diversity in the, oops, is it? Yeah, okay. In the clones, in the rootstocks, that we don't use enough. We are always planting the same type of clones and same type of rootstocks, but this diversity can help us to really adapt to those conditions. Also about new grape varieties. So we took part to the national program Resdur with the INRAE to create new grape varieties that are resistant to mildew and powdery mildew, but also resistant to climate change. keeping a bit more acidity, being a bit later, for instance. Water stress resistant too. So last year was the first year we could plant Voltis. So yes, you're right, Michel, about the cliché we have about Champagne. We say it's very conservative, but we changed the way of also training the system. So now we can plant wider rows that are more interesting because they keep a bit more acidity for a number of reasons. The way we manage the leaf and also the soil management. So this is a bit tricky because we also engage on a zero herbicide policy. In 2018, we were at 1.4 average herbicide treatment. Today, we are at 0.3 average herbicide treatment in Champagne. So this is a big decrease. But at the same time, we have to regulate the cover crop, and it's a bit tricky to never till, especially in a very wet region. And the grape ripening, this is not so well known as a tool for climate change adaptation, but this is crucial, is to be able to monitor the ripening of the grape very precisely. So we have a network of about 200 harvesters that are sampling every day their plots. And we have a collaborative networks, a portal where they share the data, and this allows us to take very precise decision on the harvest date, because in Champagne everything is always collective. So we say, okay, maybe this village will be ready at that time, and that's very important for the picking strategy. And to finish in terms of enology, winemaking, we are facing a warm harvest, which is completely new for us. So we are discovering, sorry for the very obvious part for the people living in South Africa or maybe Australia. But for us, it's very new. So the very fancy colored crates that you see in Champagne with the brand of the house, now we are trying to make them understand that white is a bit better to avoid the grape to heat. So that's very basic, but that's a start. To rapid pressing, having some pressing centers that are equipped to cool off the grape, because this is where it's efficient. Because then when the grape are too hot, trying to cool off the juice is almost too late. Okay, in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of damage to the quality, it's almost too late. So it's before the pressing. And also in terms of the choice of winemaking practices. So this is more the secret part of the chef de cave, but yeah, they try to make some to make less malolactic fermentation, at least in the blending, not 100%, but to keep some very fresh, more acidic juice, and to increase a bit the amount of grape they use from the ancient varieties like Arban or Petit Meslier that were quite acidic and not very pleasant. So they were a bit forgotten a few years ago. Everybody was focused on Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Meunier. But today we try to discover again all this ancient knowledge. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. I just have a quick question. I know we're running a bit behind, but it was the first year that you harvested Voltis as an experimental. How is it going? And my second part of the question is, you mentioned grapes like Petit Meslier who keeps their acidity. So why did you feel you still need to explore with hybrids? Well, you had grapes that been there and not used as much, but are still a tool to keep that freshness.
So regarding Voltis, it has been allowed today in the Champagne, I would say, because we had 10 years of testing. So we know already what it tastes like. And we've done a lot of tasting panel. And the funny stuff is when you mix it with Chardonnay, up to 5%, 10%, even 15%, people tend to prefer the blend than the 100% Chardonnay. But if it's above, they don't like it so much. So for the moment, so that's what we put in the rules. So now it's allowed in the blend, but not 100% Voltis, because yeah, the quality is not there. And that's answer a bit of your other question is we really believe in diversity, because every grape brings one part of the solution, and Arban, Petit Meslier are interesting, but they are not diseases resistant like the new varieties that we are that we are exploring. So we try to have this resistance, and also with the TPCT. So for instance, we are collaborating with Burgundy in a program called Cepinov. So the idea is to adapt the grape we got from the Resdur national program from INRAE to a more specific type, closer to Chardonnay and Pinot, because we share those grapes with Burgundy. So we are collaborating with them on that.
Merci. Marc, it's been difficult for you in the last years. It's been very challenging. I think it was in 2020 that you lost 80% almost to fungal
Correct.
diseases.
Yeah.
And then in 2023, you lost 80% to drought.
Mhm.
So it's two very different issues, but has a huge impact. Are we still going to drink cava in 20 years?
Hopefully, yes. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Michelle, to letting me participate to this event. And first of all, I don't know where Megan is from New Zealand. I can not see her, but thank you for sharing all this information. You are two ear lights away from the majority of the wine regions in the world, and thanks for sharing. And I learned a lot of things, and for sure I will transmit this to my region, to Penedès and Cava. And the rest of the speakers are also pretty, yeah? But I mean, this in personal opinion was very inspirational for me. So a little bit of context. Sumarroca is a family winery in a region that we were producing wine for 2,700 years, called Penedès, just south Barcelona and in front of the sea. And it's a winery that the family since ground zero had the clear idea to produce good wines and cavas. Thank you. Dry farm, ecologic, no, bio, and bed for quality. And nowadays we are hyper certified with as much certifications as we discovered, such as ecologic, vegan, also something called SMETA that has, apart from recognize what you are doing in terms of ecology and sustainability, there's human rights, the worker rights, etc., which are very important also. But the volunteer agreement to reduce the CO2 emissions, part of the biosphere program to reintroduce animals and fauna and flora in our vineyards, etc., preparing for the ISO 14068, AEFS, blah 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 blah. So we are an hyperactive winery in that sense. 70% of the energy is great thanks to the solar panels, and every time we see I+D project, we jump in because we love these kind of things, no? Yesterday, Mr. Abraham says one thing that I would like to repeat and change a little bit, if I may. He says to produce more, no, more or less, to produce more, we definitely need more resources. Right now, in my region, to produce less, we need more resources. I don't know if you ever been, or if you recently have been in Barcelona, where I live. As soon as you land, there's a huge screen that says climatic crisis, save water while here. It's the first time, and I'm traveling all over the world, that I see something like this. I bet that happens in other parts of the world, but that's scary. So we do a lot of efforts to be sustainable, and if you see our figures, it seems like we are less sustainable than in the past, because it's our other things that are happening quite fast, no? We are facing huge problems. The biggest problem today is water. It's 80% of the people that works, that produces wine in Penedès have dry farms. So nobody was thinking about irrigating, most likely for a cultural thing, and it's about to change, but that's the reality today. And irrigating has a problem, no? Where the water comes from. First of all, we have problems with the green water. For those who never heard that term, is the water that comes from the sky. And the last 12 years, the average rain is 530 liters. And however, the last 5 years is the average is 320, and the last year was 288 liters. So this draw is quite obvious. But the problem is not about the quantity of rain, it's how it rains. So we say in Penedès, to have an effective rain, it should rain about 20 liters every time that rains. In 2023, it happens one time. In 2022, 2 times. In 2021, 3 times. And 2020, that we lost 80% of the production, 6 times. So more than 20 liters. The worst is a survival rain. We say that it should rain 10 liters, every time that rains. That happens last year 2 times. In 2022, 5 times, 0 times in 2021. So just to make you understand what I'm talking about, it rains more than more than 10 liters last year, 3 days. That's what we are facing. And of course, there's an effect, again, we can see it with the yields, no? We passed in the 90s more than 8,000 kilos per hectare, 2007, 7,700. The 2010-ish decade, 6,800, going down right now in this decade is 5,500 kilos and going down. We have an internal joke in Penedès saying, before we were talking about how many liters rain today. Nowadays we say how many seconds rain today. So that's what we are facing right now. Effects. So vegetative growth. Sorry. Usually we are talking about branches being height as 1 meter, 1.2 meters. This year is about 20 to 70 centimeters. 20 centimeters, the growth of the branches. I don't know if you ever seen that, but that's quite tough. Grass cover. We talked yesterday. We had our vineyards full of grass cover. Just the grass cover died in April. Was completely brown, so we couldn't do anything because we didn't have water to make the grass cover survive, unfortunately. Of course, the draw could be a cycle. Could be, I don't remember the name of the lady from Spain, I'm sorry. Amanda? No. Noelia, excuse me, Noelia. She said that they had the draw for 10 years. So draw, the lack of water could be a cycle, no? The worst for us is the temperature, by far. Pierre was mentioning about the 2 Celsius degrees. The last decade, we already had the 1.2 Celsius degrees of increase. That everybody's talking about the 1.5 Celsius degrees barrier, so we are there already. The average temperature is 16.3 Celsius degrees. And the worst is there's no difference, especially from spring till the summertime, between night and day. So you can have nights where you can have 24 hours of 25, 30 Celsius degrees all day long. And that is what scares us the most, because the rain, well, there's different things that we are doing to work with, especially blue and gray water, but with the temperature, there's nothing we can do about it. Plus, due to these high temperatures, we're afraid of the spring rain, because definitely if it rains this spring, we are going to have mildew and lose part of the production once again. So what we are doing, so I'm happy to hear that Champagne is start thinking about pewees and other varieties, because we believe that is the future. We know that wine is a tradition, and people sometimes is attached to the tradition, but we have to be prepared for the future. And I believe peewee could be peewee, and this kind of strategy could be very beneficial for the future. Ourselves, we start a project 20 years ago called Vines from the World, in order to discover grapes that could be planted in our region and survive disease, stress, etc., etc. At the beginning, we start with the Catalan traditional varieties, then the Spanish, then the European, then the worldwide, and we had Koshu from Japan, and I don't know, other lost varieties, and that was very interesting. But right now we are doing the same, but forward, a step forward, by the pewees and this kind of new grape varieties. Also the rootstock. Sumarroca also works, or the family Sumarroca owns a company called Agromillora. There's very interesting studies and research about the rootstock. And right now there's a rootstock called M. There's 4 different kind of rootstocks that are specifically designed to resist the hydric stress. So this combination, in our opinion, of new grape varieties or traditional grape varieties that are better adapted or more resilient to the climate change, plus this rootstock could be a win combination, and we are betting for that. Also, we are changing the way we are driving the vineyards. Before it was north to south, we try to be east to west to protect a little bit more, changing the quantity of leaves. So removing or having the maximum from the south and remove the one that from the north to have a little bit more air passing through the vines, changing the plantation mark or reducing the height of the vineyards, etc., etc., etc. But especially the compost. We have a compost. We do our own organic compost. Yesterday I was learning a lot about it. I know it's not the best of the best, but we are using the fresh organic material. We mix it with the straw water. We do well, it's doing this, not fermentation, this evolution. And we work very seriously before, during the fallow, no, when there's nothing planted, and also while the plant is planted, and we see some very good results. But we are facing another problem. If it's not raining, this organic material, this compost that we are using, the water is the one that transmit this, the beneficials, the elements to the roots, etc., etc. So we have seen that in some occasion it's not working that well. So we are using also organic liquid compost and investing a lot of time, energy, and resources right there. So we do many other things. Maybe during the, if you are interested, we can discuss later. So does that works? Because the target of all this blah blah I was talking about is to be able to continue producing cava and keep the typicity. So all this effort only give us 5% more grapes than the average of the region. And we are doing a lot of things. And so it's enough. Definitely it's not enough. So we are start thinking about other things, such as irrigating, that it was not our main goal in the past, and start working with projects specifically concern the blue water and the grape water. We have our own biologic filter station, and we are planning to use this water for irrigation for the future. So it's going to be complicated, but not impossible. It's just we have to be careful. My advice, if I may, to the rest of the regions is water is going to be a problem. Just start working today, and generally speaking, all the resources, but water in specific is going to be a huge problem. Be smart, and maybe it's not too late, but it's going to be a little bit more complicated for Catalonia or for Penedès in particular. And so it's changing the typicity. Yes, Pierre was saying already, losing a little bit of the acidity. The wines tends to be a little bit more straight, meaning that are more mature from ground zero, losing a little bit of the age potential, and being more ripe. No, since we opened the bottle, less age potential and nothing else. We can discuss later on other things. Sorry.
Merci, Marc. So Jean-Benoit, you've experienced something very different. In February 2023, you had a polar vortex in Nova Scotia, and we were doing the conference right after that, and everyone was, the morale was down. A lot of people lost vines to winter kill. High percentage of vineyards, actually, not only Vitis vinifera, but hybrids, which we think they're more resistant, but many of the vines are dead. So you've been on the panel here every single edition, and you've talked about how the Stali's influence in Nova Scotia by climate change. But when we discussed together before the conference, you wanted to talk about a little bit more how to be sustainable. If what can you do when there comes a year and it's very difficult? You still want to make sparkling wine in the long term, but on the other side, if you don't want to close business and have a business that still exists,
Mhm.
what can the plan be?
Yes. Well, you said it. We were very privileged over the years. We had so many opportunities to speak, and I will be pouring wines in a few minutes and this afternoon later. So maybe what I can do, I know we're running out of time. So how about I take maybe 5 minutes. I keep it short and sweet and give you the opportunity to speak maybe a little bit more. Would that make sense?
Go with that.
Okay.
Thank you, Jean-Benoit.
So just a little overview of our unique ecosystem in Nova Scotia on the edge of the Bay of Fundy, and how perhaps it is a match made in heaven for traditional method sparkling. Very briefly, the Bay of Fundy is the definition of a force to be reckoned with in the natural world. It has more water going through it on a daily basis than all the fresh water rivers of the world combined. So there is so much turmoil that it creates an ecosystem immediately surrounding the bay that is equally as unique. And as the tides go up and down, there is a tremendous amount of air movement, and it is precisely what allows us to extend the growing season into the fall and pick later in the season with high phenolic maturity, low sugar content, and high acidity. And this is going to be obviously an overgeneralization, but let's say that the premise is that the needle moves at a planetary level, especially as it relates to heat units. If you had to locate Nova Scotia on a scale or a spectrum like this, essentially Nova Scotia in a nutshell would be about where Champagne was between 88 and 2001. It is kind of like the cycle of nostalgia at Urban Outfitters, the present time minus 25 years. So that would be the ecosystem of the Annapolis and the Gaspereau Valley in a nutshell. And maybe if I could plant a little seed for questions maybe later. One thing that we've been thinking about, obviously, as many producers in the room, is economic accessibility being a variable of significance as we move forward. And I certainly have some questions about a certain sequential order that can create a socioeconomic context that is hospitable for those wines, like that are perhaps the byproduct of RA. Thanks for the abbreviation, John. That will land, let's say, to quantify it, between $30 and $45. And so essentially, if there is a polarization of wealth and a lot more resource scarcity, and proportionally some kind of equally polarized model where clearly luxury goods are doing very well, and the economy segment is also doing very well. Well, what is going to happen to these artisanal wine kind of in that no man's land? And so that is the question that I'd like to ask the room, and please feel free to come by and speak to me directly, because these are the questions that we are raising, alongside with so many changes with health authorities and rites of passages at adolescence. I don't know, from a generational point of view, I know that alcohol was mandatory in my graduation to adulthood, so very, very different between the sensory experience of the Brussels sprouts, where I decided that I didn't like it, and it was over until they fried them in butter at Joe Beef, but beer was completely different. You had to persevere, and so now that starting with Gen Z, essentially there are very little kind of like incentive to persevere if the sensory experience of alcohol doesn't fit the bill. And so there are synergetic, I guess, outcomes coming from, like different points, whether it's socioeconomic or rites of passages, and what can we do as a society, to be able to make sure that we have the consumers that are able to have their cake and eat it too, because everyone wants to have their cake and eat it too, which would be produce a wine with an element of economic accessibility, with all the sustainability in the world that's built into it. We all want that. Unfortunately, kind of something's got to give. And same thing at the consumer level. I'm sure that we would want to go, to a restaurant and pay, $300 for our meal and feel like perhaps, there's an aspirational value to that, and that does not suggest, that you are elevating yourself on a scale of privilege. And that would be another definition of having your cake and eating it too, which is privilege, but, like in a way that is aspirational as well. And I know it's still possible, but for how long? So come say hi, and maybe we can continue the dialogue.
Thank you. I think you need a further discussion with Yves-Marie from the first day. Yeah. So the certificate, within a portfolio, to have that other option at what you're doing. Deirdre, so some of you might know her. She makes wine La Garagista in Vermont. I was doing a webinar with her recently, and we talked a lot about that because they have cold years. She has hybrids, but she has planted she has a lot of fruit tree around, and she does co-ferment and she does ciders, and to ensure that she is sustainable. So in the year that are very difficult, wine is not the only thing she relies on, which is a great segue to Quebec, because you don't make fruit wine, Marc, but I know in Quebec, some of the producers have done that in some years, where they have turned, they had apple trees around them, and in difficult year, making cider and also making some piquette, which is on the side, and lower alcohol, was a way to be financially sustainable in difficult year. You've made the decision to make sparkling wine with hybrids in Quebec. Very courageous choice. We had raving comments about your wine in the last couple of days. A lot of people came to me and said, wow, that's delicious. We've never had them. I would like you to tell people where you're located and the condition. We often make a short statement, and Mathieu talked about that a little bit, but it's not because you're in Quebec that it's getting easier necessarily. You have made the choice of have hybrids. If you started all over again today, would you still go 100% hybrid to make sparkling wine?
Thank you, Michelle, for having me on this panel. I'm very, I feel very privileged to be here. Yes, the answer is yes. I would go with hybrids all over again for two reasons. The first reason is most of the hybrids that we're using here are crosses between the river grapes. A lot of people don't know, but there's wild grapes that grow in Quebec, in southern Quebec. They're called the river grapes. They're one of the characteristics of those grapes is they're highly acidic. Your two cheeks want to, get together when you eat them. They're terrible. My grandmother used to make jelly out of them, and it used to be a torture to eat it. But if you cross that with the vinifera grapes, it will give you the long-standing acidity that you need to make a good sparkling wine as your base thing. And so for two reasons, we decided to go with hybrids. First was because of the local genetics that's in the grapes. If it grows here, then it must be adapted to the to the area. Then the second thing was I like the fact that it was different. the last thing I want Quebec wine industry to be is a copycat of some other wine industry. You know, we have to find our own identity and be who we are. So that was the second reason why I decided to do that. Of course, we're experimenting with vinifera grapes. You know, we have Pinot Meunier, we have Pinot Blanc, we have Chardonnay, you know, and loads of other varieties. But the main of our product is done through hybrids. And another reason for it is, you know, in my spray program, you know, I have half the sprays on the hybrid than I do on the vinifera grapes. So to me, it just makes sense. So yeah. So enough about hybrids. I want to talk a bit about the reality of Quebec. You know, Quebec wine industry is a very young industry. You know, it started in the 1980s, roughly. And we saw tremendous change in the climate over the years. So just to give you an idea, we used to call ourselves, you know, the viticultures of the extreme, because, you know, the temperatures here will range from minus 35 to plus 35, you know, over the year. So we got both extremes that we have to deal with. But then I hear my colleagues talking about, you know, the extremes being pushed even more. So I don't think the term fits anymore. But because of those changes, you know, the change in climate, and that's what I want to explain. Our season length is very short. You know, we have last frost here. It used to be, you know, in the 1980s, last frost was the first week of June, and first frost in the spring was second week of September. So that's a very short season. You know, there are a lot of grape varieties that don't do well in that short season. So we had to find grape varieties that were, you know, that could do well in that very short season. With the climate change, you know, we gained at least 2 weeks in the spring and 3 weeks in the fall. And that allows us to do certain things that we couldn't do before. So now, you know, most of the time we don't get, you know, a killing frost until the third week of October, and some regions in Quebec, you know, they go till beginning of November before they get the killing frost. And that's a huge game changer for the wine industry. So Quebec's wine industry had to adapt over the years several times. You know, in the first years in the 1980s, people were burying vines to keep them from freezing during the winter. Then about 10 years ago, you know, burying vines, you know, is very intensive and not very good for the environment. So people starting using geotextiles. So they were making tents, you know, over the rows, and that worked because we have typically a lot of snow. You know, where I live in the Eastern Township, it's about 150 kilometers southeast of here. We typically, at this time of year, we'd have, you know, at least a meter of snow on the ground, at least, you know, if not more. When I left to come here on Sunday, we had about 3 centimeters of snow. And that snow is super important because it's a natural insulator. So you have your geotextile itself, you know, it does keep the warmth from the, you know, from the ground, you know, around your vine. But if you have snow over top of that, it increases tremendously the power of the geotextile. Give you an example. Last year we had a cold snap, went down minus 33, which is pretty normal for where I live. And under the geotextile, it was minus 14.8. So it's not bad, you know. My vines can survive. But then, you know, 2 days later, we have, you know, warm weather. It's minus 28. But it's windy. It's windy, and there's no snow on the ground. Guess what happened under the geotextile? It was minus 26. So huge difference whether we have snow and whether it's windy or not. So again, we're trying to adapt. We're trying to come up with better geotextiles that will prevent the wind from going through. So these are all kinds of things that, you know, adapting is in our nature. and nature's way of adapting is through creating new species of itself. That's why I think the using hybrid makes sense, because it's the way of nature to adapt to the new reality of where it's at. You know, and to me that's super important. I'll stop there because I know we're a bit behind schedule.
That's okay. Thank you so much. I want to have one question for you. If you could just, each of you, before I ask everyone to ask their question, the situation is not easy for any region. You have all the challenges. Knowing what you know now, when you think of the style of wine of your region, if you could each tell me in one sentence or two maybe, how you see the style of wine. Were you listening, Marc? I was saying, no, we're all living a difficult situation. You're all doing a lot of things to adapt and mitigate climate change. But from your experience now, if you project yourself in 20, 30 years, how do you foresee the style of wine you make in your region in one or two sentences? Pierre?
Wow, that's very, very difficult. We are actually trying to define today Champagne typicity, because now that we are having new grapes coming up from the R&D project, we try to define, are they typical for the Champagne? And that's funny because whenever we ask to 20 different professionals, we have 20 different definitions for the Champagne typicity. So we try to build a definition. For the moment, we don't have it, but there is a consensus about some freshness, some elegance, some citrus aromas, but it's much more complex than that. And it will probably evolve a bit, because even the Champagne from 50 years ago was completely different. So yeah, that's Champagne is wider than that. There is also a myth about the Champagne product, and so that's not just the taste. But what we are trying to do today in terms of viticulture and winemaking practices is to keep at least this freshness and this elegance, and not to have too extracted wines and too intense exotic taste.
So a couple of things. I believe the concept of vintage that is very typical in Cava, to have the liquid that is vintage, is going to change, because we will take profit of this vintage that we overproduce a little bit more, and we will and blend with other to have say an average quality. Also, by the choice that we are doing to certain grape varieties, will change the profiles. Grapes as Parellada and Macabeo will little by little disappear, and everybody will bet more for Xarel·lo, that is the queen of the local grapes. So in my opinion, the wines will be a little bit fruitier, more mature, as I was saying before, with a little bit less acidity. Hopefully, as good as today.
Thank you.
So if I was to say, hey, I have a great idea, I'm going to move to Quebec and start a microbrewery, would you say that perhaps I have missed jumping on the bandwagon at the right time? Quite likely, right? And for the same reason, I don't think that we're heading into a particularly Epicurean, like Eurocentric Epicurean phase. And so to answer your question, there's this assumption that when an emerging wine region is in its infancy, that there's a trajectory of exponential growth that inevitably ensues. And my answer to your question is that will not happen to Nova Scotia. It will stay small.
Thank you, Jean-Benoit.
And to jump on that bandwagon, I think it's going to be relatively the same with Quebec. You know, if I use the analogy that you used a little bit earlier, you know, if Nova Scotia is the Champagne in late 90s, 2000, we're probably the Champagne of the 1960s, 70s. So in 20 years from now, you know, it makes us Nova Scotia. So
Well, only during the winter parts, because the moderation also, you know, is proportionally relevant in this summer, in the sense that I think that you know, you would have the summers of California in 20 years' time, which means harvesting for traditional method sparkling in July. The winters would be Champagne-esque, but the summers would be Californian.
I think it depends. You know, Quebec is huge. You know, people don't know this. You know, especially people from Europe. But you know, we can fit France 3 times in Quebec. So we got a lot of land. So we can, you know, we can find, you know, maybe areas that are more suitable for planting grapes. Yeah.
Thank you. I know we went over a little bit. It's 12:13, so I'll just take 2 questions. And I do want to leave you time for lunch and to chat, so we'll just extend the lunch period a little bit. Any question in the room?
Just a question for Marc. Being based in Spain, for you, Marc, Marc from Sumarroca, if we think about sparkling wine as from a style perspective, do you think it's easier to produce a sparkling wine than a still wine under current climate changes? Now, just explain quickly, if we think about phenolic ripeness, aromatic ripeness, and the fact that sparkling wine can be harvested early, we look at acidity and we look at the secondary fermentation to build up the sensory complexity. So there's actually an opportunity within Spain and current climate changes. So just a question, your opinion, do you find it easier to produce a sparkling wine compared to a still wine?
No.
I can maybe, do you want me to repeat? I don't know if it's...
If the question, if I understood correctly, if it's going to be easier in the future to produce a sparkling wine or wine, and we have the sensation that it's going to be easier to produce wine. That's the sensation that we have. Also, the style of the Sumarroca, even though we represent 0.4% of the population, we are 16% of the Grand Reserva cavas, the cavas with a longer aging, belongs to Sumarroca in the international market. So our signature is to extra age the products, and we can see that this is more and more complicated because what I was saying before, no. So yes, we are more going to the wine direction, especially with Xarel·lo, that I think it's easier to work with because of the maturation, hydric stress, etc., etc. I don't know if I answered your question. I'm sorry, it was hard to listen your question properly. Sorry.
Thank you. We're going to take one more question.
Yes, I kind of have the same question for Pierre from Champagne. I drink a few still Champagne, some Coteaux Champenois from a few grower Champagne. But is this a thing? Like at Comité Champagne, do you discuss this as an orientation for like marketing and stuff of like leaving that sparkling wine image of an industry going towards more like still wine? Well, since the vintage are becoming easier, let's say, on the short term, very important. Some growers, small-scale growers, are experimenting a bit more of Coteaux Champenois. For the moment, it's quite tiny. It's a bit like we were talking about Arban and Petit Meslier. The volume of this production is huge in the specialized media, but in the reality is extremely tiny. So that's interesting experiment, and that's also a way of seeing how the wine, the still wine behaves. But for the moment, the priority is still on sparkling wine. But I was talking about the adaptation of champagne. Champagne has also adapted to the taste of the market. You know, before it used to be very sweet. Now the climate allows us to not use the dosage so much, but it's also because the consumer don't want it so much. So it will also depend on the market.
Pierre, Marc, Jean-Benoit, Marc, thank you so much. Everyone, it is 12:20, so we'll start again at 1:45 and we'll catch up in the afternoon. I hope you continue the conversation in the room. Enjoy lunch.